A New York megachurch gets accused of spending $1.4 million in unauthorized funds on personal flights, alcohol, haircuts, and surfing lessons. An investigation gets done. The church announces the pastors are cleared. And when anyone asks for the proof, you can't see it. That's exactly what's unfolding at Fount NYC right now. And the deeper one goes into this story, the more questions start piling up. Here's everything that's known so far. Josh and Georgie Kelsey are the head pastors of Fount NYC, a megachurch in New York City that they founded back in 2013 under the name C3 Brooklyn. The church was originally part of the Sydney, Australia-based C3 Church Global Movement, until controversies fractured that network and several affiliated churches rebranded. C3 Brooklyn became Fount NYC in 2023. And now here's where things start getting interesting. Last fall, the Kelseys sold their New Jersey home and quietly moved back to Australia, reportedly to care for a sick family member. A personal matter, seemingly. But then January 2025 arrives. A former board member named David Chan emails the entire congregation directly, attaching a whistleblower report from former finance manager Isabella Aguilar, along with an independent financial review she had commissioned. And what's inside those documents? Allegations that the Kelseys spent nearly $1.4 million on the church's American Express card, without proper documentation or board approval. The breakdown? $30,000 in personal flights, $3,500 in alcohol, $2,300 in haircuts, and $9,000 in surfing. Josh Kelsey's explanation for the surfing expenses? It was for his mental health following the stress of COVID. That detail has been left for the public to evaluate on its own. A new board was elected on January 11th. They reviewed the preliminary financial report and immediately found fault with it. So they set it aside and commissioned their own. Hiring Dentons, one of the largest multinational law firms in the world. Dentons assigned a former pastor turned federal attorney named Trinity Jordan to lead the case. Jordan went from ministry to becoming an assistant U.S. attorney in Miami, and he specializes in nonprofit law. When reached out for comment, Jordan declined to speak on the record. The investigation proceeded. Dentons produced a 455-page report, 400 pages of which reportedly detail 11,000 individual credit card transactions. On the board's conclusion? The Kelseys are cleared. The $1.4 million figure was significantly exaggerated. The majority of those charges, the board claims, came from other staff and volunteers, not the pastors. There were duplicate entries, vendor refunds, and accounting adjustments baked into that original number. Of the charges that remain, 81% are described as legitimate ministry expenses. Josh Kelsey reportedly paid back approximately $31,000 he owed the church. The board also noted that the Kelseys have donated $350,000 of their own money to the church since its founding, framing them not as bad actors but as misunderstood and generous leaders. Case closed? Not so fast. When the Roy's report requested the full 455-page investigation, the board declined. What they offered instead was a 6-page summary, written by the board itself. Unread that again. The people defending the pastors wrote the summary of the investigation that cleared the pastors. Board President Frank Wheatley stated that church members can request to view the full audit. A town hall was held on April 1st, which notably was not recorded. And the full report remains locked behind attorney-client privilege. Wheatley's justification. Waiving attorney-client privilege would, in his words, undermine the entire process. The argument being that privilege is precisely what allows legal counsel to operate independently. But here's where that reasoning starts to unravel. And this is where the experts come in. Church ABUSE. Investigators and legal scholars have told the Roy's report that genuine independence is nearly impossible when a church hires its own attorney and retains privilege over the findings. The reason is straightforward. An attorney carries a fiscal responsibility to the client. The client in this case is the church board that hired Dentons in the first place, so the question becomes, independent from whom, exactly? The late Pete Singer, executive director of Grace, Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment, addressed this precise issue. He stated that churches should not have total control over whether a final report gets published. Whistleblowers and affected parties deserve a voice in that process because, in his words, That report is power. Something stands out sharply in the board's 6-page summary. Multiple individuals were interviewed during the investigation, including former CFO Mike Lark, who reportedly told investigators there was no fraud, no concealment, and no intent to defraud. That statement made it into the summary. But Isabella Aguilar, the finance manager who initiated this entire situation, is nowhere to be found in that document. Not a single quote, not a reference to her findings, not an acknowledgement of her years-long attempts to get Josh Kelsey to properly document his expenses. Complete silence. And then there's David Chan, the former board member who blew the whistle publicly. He was invited to participate in the investigation. He declined because the board refused to offer him legal immunity, and the individual arguably best positioned to speak to board dysfunction and internal cover-up concerns decided the conditions weren't safe enough for him to participate. That is not a footnote. That is a fundamental gap in the credibility of this entire process. The board communicated to the Roy's report that they are, quote, committed to transparency with those who are part of our community. To be fair, making the report available to church members is something. Holding a town hall is something. Pledging annual audits going forward is something. The board has also announced its intention to pursue membership with the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, a recognized accountability body for Christian nonprofits, though it should be noted that some critics have previously alleged ECFA membership functions more as a rubber stamp than a genuine safeguard. But the picture of transparency being painted here deserves scrutiny. Transparency that only exists behind closed doors, for members only in unrecorded meetings, protected by attorney-client privilege and summarized by the very people with a vested interest in the outcome. That is not transparency. That is controlled messaging. A genuine act of transparency would be releasing the 455-page Denton's report publicly. It would include the testimony of the whistleblowers in any official summary. It would not ask the broader public to simply trust the word of a board whose primary accountability runs to the institution it serves. Or perhaps the Kelseys are innocent of intentional fraud? Perhaps the $1.4 million figure was genuinely inflated. Perhaps what happened here was reckless financial governance rather than deliberate theft. All of those possibilities remain on the table. But what is not on the table, what is simply a matter of documented fact, is this. 2 pastors were accused of serious financial misconduct. They departed for another country before those accusations became public. An investigation was commissioned, paid for, and controlled by the church. The primary whistleblowers were either sidelined or erased from the official summary. And the full evidence continues to sit behind a wall of privilege, accessible only to a select few. In any other institutional setting, corporate, governmental, or nonprofit, this sequence of events would immediately raise red flags. When an institution holds the only copy of the report that exonerates it, the burden of proof does not fall on the accusers. If there is truly nothing to hide, the path forward is simple. Release the report. This story continues to develop, and it will be worth watching closely.